Hello, welcome to another episode of History in the Dark. I am your host, Darkness the Curse. And before we begin, as always, thank you so much to my generous patrons, my British rail critics, and of course, my underwater train finders. You are the reason why this content remains small. I'm so small, so tiny. You can't even see me, microscopic. And today, we are going to discuss really small railways. Just the teeniest, tiniest railways you ever did see in your life. Now, I do want to stress, when I say small, I don't mean by length, I mean gauge. We're talking minimum gauge railways this time, which are not to be confused with rideable miniature railways, as they are absolutely not the same thing. Miniature gauge railways are functional rail lines. They sometimes do freight work. They've actually historically been used in many capacities, just like regular full-size gauge locomotives normally would be. But as a result, many of their trains are small. And the rails they run on are small. And everything about them is small. And I'm going to talk about 5 of the smallest railways ever. Okay, before I say this, I do want to stress that I picked it for 2 reasons. 1, it's a pretty unique utility railway in terms of what it was used for. 2, I am never going to be able to pronounce this correctly, but that's half the fun of this. The Geriatriezentrum Am Wienerwald Feldbahn. Goodness, I don't know how well that went. I tried my best. But this railway is a unique case, actually. It's one of the most clever and rather short, specific reasons to utilize a rail network I've ever seen in my life. This is a 500mm, or 19 3/4 inch, minimum gauge railway that was constructed in 1904 on the premises of the former nursing home, Lainz, in the 13th District of Vienna, Hietzing. This is in Austria, which I think is the first time we've actually talked about anything from Austria, beyond those horses. Until it sadly shut down in 2011, it was actually the oldest minimum gauge railway in use in Austria. It was meant specifically to supply clothes, food, and fuel to that nursing home. The administration of Vienna City decided to construct a manually operated narrow gauge railway for this very specific purpose. It ran on a 4-kilometer network, and its construction was completed in 3 months. In 1925, they started using battery-operated locomotives on the lines, and in 1966, they got a new diesel locomotive. It worked alongside the battery locomotives, mostly for snow removal and work trains, as well as sometimes filling in when the battery locomotives needed maintenance. By the time the operation ceased on the 27th of November 2011, it was only being used for food transport. It's a sad end for a very interesting piece of Austrian history, but the tracks are still there, as they're listed as a piece of industrial heritage, so they were retained. However, the engine sheds were demolished. The Sand Hutton Light Railway. Welcome to the world of 457mm, or 18-inch gauge. The Sand Hutton Light Railway served the estate of Sir Robert Walker, the 4th Baronet of Sand Hutton, Yorkshire. It connected the main house of the estate with the London and North Eastern Railway's Warthill Station, as well as the village of Bossall. This line operated between 1922 and 1932, and was mostly used to carry agricultural produce from the estate's farms, as well as coal to the brickworks, as well as bricks back again. The goods traffic flowed to or from the transfer sidings at Warthill Station. The line also did a passenger service as well, for personnel and visitors to the estate between 1924 and 1930. There were 4 locomotives that were operating on the lines, all of which had the same wheel arrangement, 040. But, as I've already pointed out, this line didn't last very long, only about 10 years. When Sir Robert Walker died, the line was abandoned, and by 1933 it was all torn up. To date, as far as my research shows, the only remnant of this particular line is actually a coach. In fact, the only passenger coach the line had, built in 1924. It was really big for a narrow gauge railway, 31 foot 3 inches long, or 10 meters long, and it could seat 30 people. After the line closed, it was purchased for use as a cricket pavilion at Hutton. Much later in 1967, it was actually used on a 2-foot gauge railway, the Lincolnshire Coast Light Railway, but when that closed, it sat outside for many years and rapidly deteriorated. Now it's with the Lincolnshire Coast Light Railway's new base near Skegness, and it's currently awaiting restoration. The Rufisque tramway, and I really hope I'm saying Rufisque right. This gauge was 400 millimeters, or 15 3/4 inches. Based on the name you might have noticed, this is in Rufisque, in Senegal, in Africa, at the time under the control of France. The area had been a major hub for transporting unpeeled peanuts, and early on in the 1860s, those peanuts were actually transported to the port by camel. As the exporting of peanuts kept going up, there had to be a better solution. Camels just weren't going to cut it anymore. There were too many peanuts. So of course, they had to put a railway line, or in this case, a tramway. The tramway operated for a couple decades, transporting peanuts and actually helping increase the area's economic value overall. The city actually instituted a toll for using the tramway, and that helped their budget as well, though this did not last. Eventually, the tramway kind of became obsolete, as did the town in general when it came to economics, because of Dakar, which was 28 kilometers to the northwest, became the capital of French West Africa. Dakar wound up with a deep seaport, as well as a meter gauge railway, and that made them a lot more accessible than they had been before. Rufus just wasn't reasonable when it came to export, and eventually the tramway just simply fell out of use. The Redwood Valley Railway. This is a 15-inch, or 381mm gauge railway, and let me assure you, I just kind of picked this one a little bit at random, because there are a ton of 15-inch gauge railways. That precise measurement was pioneered by Sir Arthur Percival Heywood, all the way back in 1874, and a ton of minimum gauge railways utilized that exact measurement. This railway operates in Tilden Regional Park near Berkeley, California, and it was established in 1952 by Eric Thompson as the Tilden Southgate and Pacific Railway. At the time, it was only 12 inches, 305 millimeters. Obviously, it was scaled up eventually, and it carries over 160,000 passengers every year. As part of the railway's appeal, when it was constructed, 800, now mature, redwood trees were also planted along it. So the whole thing is kind of a treat for any environmentalists as well. The line is pretty short, and it's kind of meant for tourists. The ride only lasts about 12 minutes. And as of June 2021, the tickets are actually really affordable. $3.50 for everybody, unless you're a child under 2 years old, in which case, how are you watching this? Also, hello! Hello! Aren't you adorable? And you're free to ride the train and tell mama that you want to go on the train for free. Based on what I've been saying, yes, the Redwood Valley Railway is in operation as of now. And they actually have a total of 5 locomotives. Number 2 is called Juniper. It's an 040 diesel hydraulic locomotive that uses a vintage Hercules engine. It was rebuilt in 2008. Mostly used for track maintenance, as the real draw are the steam engines. They have number 4 Laurel, a 242, number 5 Fern, a 440, number 7 Oak, a 262, and number 11 Sequoia, a 460. I've never been out there myself, but based on what I know, this seems like a pretty interesting little ride if you're ever in the area. Most of my research shows that people have nothing but good things to say about it, and it's a nice little piece of minimum gauge preservation. But 15 inches is small, but not quite as small as the Wells and Walsingham Light Railway. This is a 10 1/4 inch, or 260mm gauge heritage railway in Norfolk, England. Look at those rails. Look at them. They're less than a foot wide, and the locomotives run on them. And the total length of the railway is actually 4 miles, which is way longer than you'd expect from such a, well, narrow gauge. The line occupies a section of the former Wymondham to Wells branch line that was closed to passengers between 1964 and 1969 as part of the beaching cuts, which is a subject I should probably talk about one day. Despite how small it is, it's still classified, technically, as a public railway, as its operation is established by an Act of Parliament. The original establishment of the preserved line was authorized by the Wales and Walsingham Light Railway Order of 1982, the terms of which were actually altered in an amendment in 1994. Prior to 1982, the title of the world's smallest public railway was actually used by the Romney Hietzing Dymchurch Railway. Even though they're 15-inch, and like I said, there's a lot of 15-inch, Wales and Walsingham is a bit smaller than that, and now they are considered the world's smallest public railway. They have several locomotives, both historical and present. Their original one was number 1, Pilgrim, an 060T, but she's now based at the Watford Miniature Railway. Number 2 is Weasel, a diesel hydraulic, technically, 060DH, that's still in service, but it's been given a tram engine bodywork to make it kinda look like Toby, even though it's a diesel in disguise. Don't you lie to me, you're not Toby! Number 3 is Norfolk Hero, a 260 plus 062 Garrett locomotive, currently in service as one of their principal engines. Number 3 is Norfolk Harvester, who's a diesel, a Bobo, currently in service as another principal and Thunderbird engine as they call it, which is a fancy name for a pusher or a banking locomotive, helping the others get up hills. Number 5 was Lady Jane Grey, an 040, but she was just with the railway on loan, so she's no longer there as far as I'm able to gather. And number 6 is Norfolk Heroine, another Garrett, 260 plus 062, another principal engine. As you can see, they mainly focus on Garretts over there now, and that's pretty cool, honestly. I think a big part of the draw of this particular railway is just how narrow it is. You don't see railways like this very often, at least not functional, actual public ones. So if you're ever in that area, I'd say check it out. I certainly would like to. And with that, a special thank you goes to all my underwater train finders. Thomas Ward, Lord Captain Von Thrust III, Sundew 267, Orange Glass, Joshua Long, Ohio Trucker 1, Royal Hudson 2860, Lord Hoth 444, Arthur Roy, Benjamin Owens, Panzer Kitsune 131-232, Mr. Black Rose, Tribal Typhoon, Master of None, Josh Johnson, Lock Kraken, Twin Fox, Dimeblade 17, Anzac A1, and Dawsy Was It. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.